Okay, let's get started.
And you Bucketheads are gonna be sorry when my uncle, the Emperor, finds out you're keeping me here against my will.
Hello and welcome to this special episode about the TIE Fighter Total Conversion. Soon you will hear an interview with the project lead of this great game, Jason Millward, also known as Angel. My name is Kevin Arnold. I am the host of Bucketheads, which is a German podcast about Star Wars. Don't bother about liking and subscribing, dear international listeners. The podcast is extraordinary, of course, and made with lots of love for Star Wars, but it's in German, so the benefit for non-German listeners should be limited. You can gain a lot of benefit by playing the TIE Fighter Total Conversion if you have not already done so. Check out their homepage, subscribe to Angel's YouTube channel and Twitter. You find all relevant links in the description. So let's have a talk with Jason. Let him tell us how the TIE Fighter Total Conversion was made, how he approached things like the mission design, the graphics, the sound, and I'm also curious about how big is his fear that Disney Lucasfilm will shut the whole thing down. But we shall not be guided by fear, we also celebrate the great thing that is the TIE Fighter game. Enjoy. Hello, Jason.
Hello.
I'm so glad to have you on the show. Thank you for taking your time for the interview.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I must say, when I hear your voice, I feel like being immediately transferred to the Imperial Navy because I know your voice from the game already.
Yeah, my voice is a bit sort of World War II-ish officer, so your mission today will be to interview the briefing officer of the TIE Fighter Total Conversion Project.
Gamma 1, engage the interview. At some point you must teach me how to do that. It's great. We will talk about the TIE Fighter Total Conversion, which is such a great achievement and so much fun to play. But let's remind ourselves that all this would not exist without the great work of the team at LucasArts, Totally Games, around Lawrence Holland and Edward Killam in the early 1990s, who created X-Wing and TIE Fighter.
Yeah.
From your point of view, Jason, what is so great about the classic TIE Fighter game?
I'm sure for many people my age, it's a combination of nostalgia, gameplay, and the fact that you're playing the Empire, the bad guys. TIE Fighter is one of the very first games I ever owned and played. Had it on the floppy disk. I was playing it on my dad's 486. I remember having to fluff about with the config.6 and autoexec.bat just to get enough memory just to play it. Didn't have a joystick to begin with, so it was all keyboard and mouse. And to this day, that's impacted my ability to play first-person shooters because I do inverted mouse, so I pull up and push down when looking in first-person shooters. But yeah, I played the hell out of that game, and much more so than X-Wing, which I played afterwards, and that's sort of a downgrade in a way in terms of game mechanics and gameplay. There was just something really cool at the time. For the time, I think the graphics and the sound, especially the music system, were quite advanced for a 1994 title. This is just before things like Doom and Quake and everything like that. They really hit the market, and 3D graphics were starting to become a thing. And then there's obviously the story element, being the Empire, the bad guys. But, you know, as an adult looking at this, it's cool in a way because I think pretty much every single Star Wars game where you do play from the perspective of the Empire, you are, I'm evil. Or will eventually defect because you're so evil, or at least you realise how evil the Empire is. But in this game, you don't really do that. You're not that evil. You're not murdering civilians. You're not destroying planets. You're just a guy doing his duty for the Empire, you know? And I think from a narrative point of view, that's quite interesting.
It is.
It's a rare perspective of the Empire, in my opinion.
The perspective is we are the Imperials. We want to bring order to the galaxy and we want to defend our Emperor.
Yeah, exactly.
Which seems to be a legitimate perspective in this game. If you zoom out and see the context, you have to agree it's not okay to be the Imperials.
Let's not kid ourselves. The Empire is an authoritarian, fascist, evil dictatorship that murders billions.
Yes.
There's no sugarcoating that.
Yeah.
But just from the perspective of this game alone, it's not that, and I really like that aspect. Yeah, and who doesn't like playing the bad guys from time to time, you know? So
yes, sometimes, and I appreciated the seriousness of the game. The narrative is strictly coherent. We are the Navy. We do things by the book.
Yeah.
It's all about order, duty, and rebel scum and traitors must be dealt with.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the game that breaks this narrative. For example, no comic relief.
No.
This greatly improves the immersion.
Yeah, there's definitely a more serious undertone to it than that was normally taken, I think, with Star Wars, and certainly from the Empire's point of view, because, again, the Empire's quite often portrayed as comically evil, I would say, especially with the newer films. But yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. Definitely a more serious tone, a lot more narrative consistency. And you spend a great deal of time actually fighting other Imperials, traitor Imperials, than you do Rebels. The Rebels are more like a sideshow in this game for a lot of the time. But that in itself makes narrative sense, because the Rebels are not a huge military power. You're the huge military power. The Rebels are just a bunch of terrorists who do hit and runs, but they don't have the resources to go toe-to-toe with the Empire. So, you know, you can't just have every mission about fighting Rebel cruisers and X-Wings and whatnot, because where are they getting all those resources from? So,
when and how did you come to the idea, I want to make this mod?
Okay, so a bit of history on this mod. There is a first iteration of this mod that was released in 2005 by the modding community and the X-Wing Alliance community. This is long, long before I even sort of joined or was aware of it. That sort of hung around for a few years, but it was just pretty much a straight port rather than doing anything particularly fancy with it, and this is before all the fancy new graphics and extra abilities of the engine that the upgrade project has brought to the table. And it's no longer available. It got taken down because of some compatibility issues. I got a hold of the mod and I played it, and you know, it was kind of fun, but so many missions were broken because of the differences between the TIE Fighter and X-Wing Alliance engines. Although it's an evolution of the same engine, there are significant gameplay and mechanical differences, and that's enough to break the balance of the missions that were ported in. So I started just tinkering with the missions a little bit, and then I just sort of got onto this. This is about 2015. I thought, well, what about if we made this a bit bigger, added some more ships in? Because the Alliance engine can take a lot more on the screen. I think the original TIE Fighter is limited to, I think it's 29 or 30 ships are able to spawn at any one time. Any more than that, the engine basically puts it on hold until another ship is destroyed, and then that ship can spawn in. But that's the technical limitation. That's why you can't have huge battles in TIE Fighter, and why, in fact, several missions are one battle spread over several missions, because that's the only way they could do it. So I posted a video in 2015, which is Battle 1 Mission 2, which is actually the one that a lot of people have been having problem with in TFTC. But that's actually one of the very first ones I actually reimagined. And I played the original version. This is on the original TFTC, just showing how quiet it is. It's, you know, Y-Wing comes in, boo-boo, dead. Wait a minute. And then another Y-Wing or two spawns in. Not a lot's going on, so I made it a far more intense mission, because you're under attack, and I want you to feel like you're under attack. I want you to feel the pressure. This is a hold the line mission. You're waiting for reinforcements to come in, so I just kept tweaking and tinkering until I felt I got this position where about 10 minutes into the mission, almost all your friendlies are dead. The Rebel corvettes are coming in. You're just like, well, what am I going to do now? How can I defeat this? And then this cathartic, amazing reaction as an Imperial Star Destroyer flanked by a couple of frigates comes in and just lays waste to everything. It's just, yes! So it's trying to evoke that kind of, yes, did it, we beat them. That's where I started, and I only started tinkering with a couple of the other missions, then I kind of left it by the wayside for a couple of years, and then I got back into it again for a couple of months, then again kind of left it aside, and then it wasn't until 2019 that I really started doing it properly. So about around September 2019, I sort of reached out to the X-Wing Alliance community and said, look, I'm doing this thing, is anyone kind of interested? You know, just trying to get a feel if anyone would actually want to play. Because one of the reasons I didn't really do much before that was, you know, it's a very niche game. Very few people play it. It's like, this is a lot of effort. But the video kept getting comments. So are you still doing this? Because this is really cool. I want you to keep doing this. You know, so this is encouragement. So yeah, about September-ish 2019, I reached out to the community. And then I realized the original TFTC project was still actually being worked on by one person. And his name's B-Man, and he's still part of the project. But he was just tinkering with it now and then. He's got very, very limited time, and so, but at the rate he was going, you may not have seen another iteration for 10 more years, and it would not be in the state it's in now, certainly. So I said, look, do you want some help? I've got these ideas, I can certainly come and help you. So he said, yeah, sure, come aboard. And slowly and surely over the next few months, it's sort of turned into me kind of barging in and taking over the whole project. So I sort of just started doing everything. I completely re-imported all the classic missions from scratch again and just started working through them and trying to balance them out. And as things went on, more and more people from the community came on board to offer assistance and help with things that I couldn't do, like fancier graphics or injecting new code into the executable to perform new functions that weren't previously possible. So that's the story so far of TFTC.
What did you personally want to achieve, to sum it up, to widen the scale and the scope and the intensity of the experience?
Yeah.
And of course the graphics.
The graphics part side of things is all because of the X-Wing Alliance upgrade mod. And so really all TFTC is doing is taking advantage of that mod. That's why you are required to install that mod before ours. It can't function without that. And seeing those graphics as they became along, it just provided me with more motivation to see TIE Fighter in this kind of glorious new remaster. I mean, it's not quite modern era graphics, but it's pretty damn close, I think. And so I wanted the classic campaigns to be as close to the original as possible, but I also wanted to see what could TIE Fighter have been if not limited by the technical limitations of its era, of 94 technology. You're part of the Empire, this massive military machine, but in TIE Fighter, it's hard to feel that because of the number of ships that are limited. In quite a few missions, particularly in later missions, you're just one ship fighting off entire waves of enemies. So you don't feel like you're part of this big military machine. That's one of the aspects of Reimagined that I wanted. You got lots of wingmates flying beside you, you've got more bigger capital ship combat going on. You're part of something. It's not just you against the world. And that's one of the big sort of motivational factors for me doing Reimagined.
Let's take a look at what the TIE Fighter Total Conversion is today. I would like to describe a few things. The TIE Fighter Total Conversion is a mod for X-Wing Alliance, meaning you have to own X-Wing Alliance and you have to install the mod X-Wing Alliance Update, upgrade it, and then you have to install the TIE Fighter Total Conversion. Then you can choose, do you want to play the TIE Fighter Classic campaign, or do you want to play the TIE Fighter campaign Reimagined? The tool you use for this choice is called Palpatine Total Converter, which is very cool, I think. When you start the game, you end up in a concourse that is designed to look like the interior of an Imperial space station or capital ship. This is basically the main menu. Like in TIE Fighter, there are several doors. Each door represents a different element of the game. There you can choose whether you want to look at the ship database, your crew quarters, the flight simulator, or the campaign. And the architecture of this menu is based on the X-Wing Alliance game.
We have received a distress signal from a Ribbleless convoy under attack by Demok marauders. The Demok attackers are using a Corellian gunship, armed cargo ferries, while a Clone War-era Acclamator cruiser is launching Y-Wings and Z-95s. The Victory Star Destroyer Protector and the modified frigate Akaga will jump in and deploy our TIEs to drive off the attacking Demok forces and save the convoy.
So when you get mission overview and a briefing in X-Wing Alliance style, the most striking difference to the classic TIE Fighter is you cannot interact with the flight officer or the member of the Secret Order of the Emperor. These two gave you primary and secondary objectives. Now in TIE Fighter Total Conversion, all mission objectives you normally get from the flight officer and the Secret Order, you have to complete them all. They are all primary objectives. Can you explain, before we get into the game mechanics more, why is that?
Yeah, the Secret Order is a big facet of the original TIE Fighter. You're working for the Emperor, you rank up with these cool, painful even looking tattoos on your arm. But as you say, the X-Wing Alliance engine does not allow you to have interactable characters like TIE Fighter did, even though it's the same engine, essentially just an evolution of it. The containers for that don't exist in the game, which is a shame. And as far as the briefing and debriefings go, it's strictly linear. You either win or you don't. There is no variation based on what kind of objectives you complete in the game, as you did with TIE Fighter. So if you didn't complete the Secret Order bonus objectives, which tended to be hidden objectives, or at least secondary ones, then the Secret Order guy wouldn't necessarily have the same dialogue. He would say something else. But that's not possible in X-Wing Alliance. And so for it to make narrative consistency, I decided the best compromise would be to make them primary objectives and just have an SO tag next to them so you know that they're Secret Order objectives. So when you complete the mission, when the Secret Order guy speaks, then narratively it makes sense what you did in the game. Because if you didn't go and do that thing in the game, and then he goes and says, yes, thank you for doing that thing, it doesn't make sense from a narrative perspective. So yeah, that's generated a bit of interest. People are wondering why we did that occasionally. Some people think it makes the classic campaigns harder. We have tried to sort of adjust the balance for that. But realistically, it's the only way we can get the sort of the narrative consistency of the Secret Order to match based on the player's gameplay. There could be some more work we could do with that potentially, but that's unfortunately the best we could do. There are just certain limitations we can't do.
I think it's a fair compromise. Let's talk about the core of the game again. The combat missions from the perspective of an Imperial pilot. That's the core of the game. You ported all 13 battle campaigns plus the training missions.
Yep, so that's 76 campaign missions plus 28 training missions.
Yeah. Plus the reimagined missions, you get a total of 145 unique missions.
Yes.
You all built this. Let's have a look at the classic missions first. How did you manage to bring them into the X-Wing Alliance engine?
We primarily use a mission editor called Allied. There is a more modern one called Yogmi, but I don't use that quite often. I'm just so used to using Allied. And Allied hasn't been updated since 2007, I think, so it's really old. But it does the job, and luckily, because they are evolutions of the same engine, they use the same mission files, which are .ti files. And so I can go into the original X-Wing game and open up the mission files, and it has all the objectives, waypoints, the ships, the text. It's all there. The problem is there are certain porting issues, so the text has to be put in certain places. Sometimes the orders don't quite translate properly. I can give an example. If a ship has a wait order, there are some missions where a ship just has a really long wait order because it's just not supposed to move anywhere, so it'd be like 40, 50 minutes. Except in X-Wing Alliance, the maximum limit appears to be about 20 minutes, and so that order translated when ported to 5 seconds. And so ships would just wait for 5 seconds and then bugger off into hyperspace. And no, that's not supposed to happen. Other issues like stations not being where they should be, even though the editor says they're here in-game, they ended up being way over there instead. And so you had to rebuild some of the flight groups. But the bigger challenges are the gameplay mechanical differences between the two in terms of, for example, starship and laser ranges and torpedo behavior, and the fact that capital ships can shoot down your warheads, point defense basically. That was another challenge in sort of getting the classic campaigns sorted. So we managed to turn off things like point defense for starships in classic, so it emulates the original behavior, shorten the laser ranges so it matches the original as well. Because we found if we didn't, then there'd be certain missions where ships were shooting at each other when they shouldn't be shooting at each other, and they'd blow up and cause mission failure, and you couldn't do anything. So, yeah.
In addition to the micromanagement you have to do, the planning, what happens if the player does this, and what happens if the player does that? You got all the problems by importing the classic missions because of the difference between TIE Fighter and X-Wing Alliance.
Yeah, and it's never going to be a one-to-one replication, as much as we might try. Since we've released, there have been a few missions which people are struggling with because of the difficulty spikes, particularly in AI behavior, but we've been noting it down and trying to balance it, try and lower the difficulty or change some conditions here and there just to make things a bit easier on the player. We spent 6 months in sort of beta testing. I had a dozen people helping me beta test both versions. Went down to half a dozen as people kind of tapered off as they do when they do beta testing. But we had one chap, his name's Blazing Firestorm, and he has been amazing. He's been so meticulous and thorough. He'll play the original mission in TIE Fighter and then play our version, and then he's like, yeah, this isn't the right kind of behavior that's going on here, and this flight group doesn't have the right color, this flight group's not coming in this line. And we had close to 2,000 bug reports over 6 months. trying to fix all those. But no matter what we do, there's still always dozens and dozens more bugs and balancing issues to sort out. But now at least we've got a big player base to find the more consistent problems people are having and trying to fix them.
Let's talk about some of the particular missions. Do you have a favorite classic mission from TIE Fighter?
No. Missions that are stuck in my memory are the ones I always had a frustrating time to deal with. The ones that you kept dying on. Battle 3, Mission 3 was a particular pet peeve of mine in Classic back in the day. It's where you have to hold position with the modified frigate Ludwig before Thrawn's Star Destroyer comes in to build a space station, and you have to fight off a rebel frigate. So it's basically a frigate versus frigate, and you're just in a TIE fighter. But it's a really, really hard mission in the original campaign. I don't think it's as hard now. As hard as it was, it's one of those missions that I quite enjoyed as well at the same time, despite its difficulty. I do still quite enjoy the Battle 1 missions where you're engaging the Lulsla in the minefield. Again, very frustratingly difficult at times, but there's that sense of elation and, yes, I finally beat this mission.
Report on primary target. Their shields are out. Middle transport and shuttles are evacuating the Lulsla.
And then other missions are just absurdly easy afterwards because you've spent all this time learning and gaining your skills as a pilot doing so. I think a lot of people, despite the nostalgia we have of these games, I think some people forget how hard games were back in the day. Today's games are very hand-holdy. They give you lots of tutorials, pop-ups, things. They want to make sure you've got the mechanics, understand it. You've got mid-mission checkpoints, saves, quick saving. You don't have that in this game. And in the 90s, many games didn't have this functionality, early 90s certainly, and older. And games were absurdly difficult sometimes. That's just the nature of how it was.
Yes, and even in the TIE Fighter Total Conversion, when you die, you die. You have to start over.
Yeah. Yeah. For the tutorial missions only, I added a respawn. It's only up to 20, but that's usually enough to complete the mission. So if you die in the tutorial missions, you do respawn and can continue. But it's just because you're in a simulator, I felt that made sense from a sort of in-game narrative perspective. Oh, you died. Okay, well, let's just reload you into a new craft. Whereas in the field, okay, no, you're dead. Sorry.
Yeah, just take the mission Save the Emperor in Battle 7, when the treacherous forces of Admiral Zarin manage to abduct Emperor Palpatine, and the player must fly in alongside Darth Vader and save the fucking Emperor. Sorry.
The Emperor's ship, the Majestic, has been seized, and the Emperor himself abducted by Zarin. Zarin's flagship, the Glory, waits off in the distance for the shuttle holding the Emperor to arrive. You will lead a group of TIE defenders to locate and disable the craft carrying the Emperor.
It was one of the larger battles in TIE Fighter, and in retrospective, it has a certain feeling of, Jesus, people back in 1994 did not know much about the Emperor.
Yeah.
People knew him from Return of the Jedi mostly and have seen this fragile man, this old wrinkled face. Yes, he could shoot lightning from his fingers, but people had no idea how powerful he really was. He would not have just let himself be kidnapped by a bunch of insurgents, torn into a small ship and abducted.
Yeah.
That's what happens in this battle in Save the Emperor.
Yeah, it always kind of bothered me. I mean, not so much as a kid, because you're like, oh my god, I'm flying next to Darth Vader, this is cool, saving the Emperor, that's great. But as an adult looking back on it, you're thinking,
yes,
especially with all the lore we have now about Palpatine, you just look back thinking, Palpatine would never allow that, unless he's doing some sort of 4D chess where he knows what's going on and he just intentionally wants to be captured, which I don't believe in this case. It's like, nah, Palpatine would just crush them.
Yes.
He'd crush them, no problem. I mean, in lore, there's supposedly a background story here where a Sith strike team got on board and used, I think it's called a Ysalamiri, which in EU canon is this creature which nullifies the Force, so nullifies its ability, and then they catch him that way. But I just don't buy it, because it's fucking Palpatine.
Yes.
So in the reimagined version of this mission, I did a significant rewrite of how this did, and it's also the largest battle in the entire reimagined campaign. I don't know if you've played that one yet, or...
Yes, I did.
Yes, so you may have noticed it's a bit of a bigger battle than the original one.
Let's guide our listeners to the experience, what do you see if you start the mission? I think you start leaving from a Star Destroyer, right?
Yes, Zarin turns on you and tries to kill Vader and say, okay, we've got to get back to Coruscant. So mission 2 is you on the Devastator. In the classic it's called Garrett, but I decided to use the Devastator because that's more well known as Vader's flagship before the Executor anyway. And you're ambushed mid-mission by another Zarin force, which has basically got you in a crossfire, and the Devastator from that battle gets critically damaged, hyperdrive disabled, and all you've got left is 3 TIE Defenders and Vader's own TIE Advanced fighter.
Alpha Crew, form up with me and initiate jump to hyperspace.
It's like, okay, well, it's just us 4. We've got to get to Coruscant because we know something's going down. So, yep, you leave from the Devastator, you jump into hyperspace, and as you come out of hyperspace, you see about 20-30 ships in the distance firing, having this battle going on. You can see like a wave of destroyers and support ships and 2 other destroyers trying to hold the line against this fleet.
Mayday, Mayday, this is the Star Destroyer Majestic. We've been disabled and are under attack.
K1, attacking.
Palpatine's destroyers drifting, disabled in space. Above Coruscant, you see the beautiful vista of Coruscant. Below space, this metropolis, and above is Palpatine's Star Destroyer drifting in space.
Yeah, we got a nice Coruscant low orbit backdrop there, and yeah, off to the side is one Star Destroyer kind of listing at an angle, and that's the Emperor's Star Destroyer. And the big narrative change we made here is that he's just trying to straight up kill Palpatine. He's not trying to kidnap him, because apart from Palpatine would never allow that to happen, why would you let him live? Why would you let someone that dangerous live when you're trying to take power? Kill him. Take power. That's all you need to do. And so, yeah, in this case, you're basically trying to save the Emperor from being killed on his starship. So that becomes sort of a big sort of holding action, and then Thrawn comes in with his Victory Star Destroyer.
Stalwart to Lord Vader. This is Vice Admiral Thrawn. We're moving to defend the Majestic.
And it's, again, just a holding action just until the Imperial fleet arrives, and then you've got the Super Star Destroyer, and then a dozen other destroyers coming at the side. And this, you've got 40 capital ships in this mission now, all in the same place. This is one of the missions where I pushed the engine as hard as I could sort of feel was acceptable to push it without killing frame rates. And I think it turned out pretty well.
Yes, it's fantastic. You just have to play the game just for this experience. You have to play the Total Conversion reimagined mission you built just for this goosebumps I get even now when I think about it.
Good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I must say I find the reimagined missions really beautiful. They really enhance the experience.
Thank you.
This is one example. Wow, it's mind-blowing.
One of the other things I wanted to do with Reimagined is maintain a more consistent narrative with the names of the ships you're encountering. So Thrawn's ship is called the Stalwart in Battle 3, and then you don't really see that ship again. When he's next in a Victory Star Destroyer, it's called Skeletor. That's it. It's called the Skeletor. But in that Save the Emperor mission in Classic, he comes in an Imperial Star Destroyer, not a Victory Class Star Destroyer. And it's like he keeps jumping to these ships. So in Reimagined, he's always in the Stalwart. And the modified frigate he's with, the Ludwig, is again the frigate you saw in Battle 3. And it's just like you see these ships that you've come to know come in as well. And it's the same for Harkov's fleet in Battle 2. Battle 2 has the first big battle, fleet battle, where I have increased the size of Harkov's ships. And you see the same ships throughout Battle 5 and Battle 7. And so it creates a narrative consistency, and you come to know these ships that you've flown with and fought against, and yeah, stuff like that.
Let's take a step back and talk about the design process of the TIE Fighter Total Conversion and the people involved. When you decided, I want this mod, you already mentioned there were people coming in. How was the workload shared and distributed?
Basically, depending on what I really needed. As I said, I kind of ended up taking over this project, and I've done the vast majority of the mission design and porting has been me. A lot of the voice work, as you know, has also been me.
Let's have an example. This is the original flight officer from the Classic.
We have traced the Mugari pirates' hyperjump path to a cargo loading area in the Tungra sector. Your first objective is to stop the cargo ferries from escaping with their contraband.
And this is you, Jason, from the Total Conversion.
We have learned of a transfer of weapons and supplies about to take place between the Mugari and the rebels. The Imperial Star Destroyer Hammer will lead an attack to destroy this transfer operation, escorted by the modified frigate Fogger. TIE Fighter and Interceptor groups will move to engage and destroy enemy starfighters.
So you said you did the mission programming, the voice acting, and what else?
As time goes on, I had to sort of learn new skills. Like, I've never really done sort of photoshopping or animation stuff before, low-level animation stuff before, but the new logo, the TIE Fighter Total Conversion logo that you see, which mimics the original, I spent a week in Adobe After Effects creating that 6-second animation. And I had to go frame by frame just so each block comes in at the right angle just to try and mimic the original logo. And there's just stuff like that I had to learn, which is really cool. And all the sort of in the simulator, when you look at the battle images and the mission images, I did all that as well. But then there's obviously so much more to this. So let's take the soundtrack, for example. We've got a remastered version of the original TIE Fighter soundtrack, which originally we weren't going to be able to do. I wanted to do it, but we didn't have anyone on board. I actually met a guy here in Helsinki for a separate sort of acting gig I was trying out, and he did music, and I asked if he was interested. He said yes, but when he looked at it, he's like, yeah, this is a lot to do, and this is a bit beyond what I think I could do. But then I came across this channel called Get Off My Lawn, run by a chap called Lordy. His name's James. And he had this thing called Guy Mod. Just for a bit of background, the original briefing officer is voiced by an actor called Guy Seiner. Some of you may know the program Allo Allo, the old British sitcom Allo Allo, and he was a German officer called Lieutenant Gruber.
And not a little talent. Before I was a window dresser, I was employed in an art gallery. Occasionally, I was allowed to touch up old masters.
Well, one has to start somewhere.
That's one of his most famous roles. But much of the original classic audio is obviously heavily compressed, low-quality audio. And James had basically run this through his software to increase the fidelity of that audio so it sounds a lot clearer.
We have traced the arms used in the recent attack on Outpost D-34 to a Mugari cargo loading area in the Tungra sector. We suspect that the Mugari are providing arms and other aid to the rebels. Our attack on this cargo area is timed to catch the Mugari and rebels in their next illicit weapons exchange.
He's an absolute TIE Fighter, total complete fan of TIE Fighter. You know, he's got the t-shirt and everything sort of guy. And I was talking about the soundtrack, and he offered to do the soundtrack, remaster soundtrack. And we took the original MIDI files. I had to piece them together because of the dynamic nature of iMuse and the way it shifts the music as you play. In the original TIE Fighter game, the in-flight tracks are broken into 2 to 4 second chunks, and an entire track, maybe about 20 chunks, and I had to basically piece those together. Then he basically uses his own software to reorchestrate the various sounds and instruments on those MIDI soundtracks and then balance them. Again, we've got another video on our YouTube channel which shows how he did that, and he explains himself with the remastering.
I will put a link in the description on your YouTube channel, and there will be, for example, this video where James explains how he did the remastered soundtrack.
More recently, a lady called Vanessa
Palmer, right?
Yes, that's Vanessa Palmer. Even more of a TIE Fighter fan. She's also big into the retro gaming scene, retro hardware scene. So she's got genuine old hardware from the 90s sort of thing. And we used it to capture the original sound, not an emulation of the soundtrack. We actually used the genuine hardware to record the most commonly used MIDI soundtrack from TIE Fighter, which was a Roland SC55. And so that is also an option in the game. So that's one example of something else that people have done. The backgrounds, the beautiful backgrounds that you see, is a combination of sort of asking for permission of people's artwork that we've seen on Google for planetary backdrops, and then his own creations. This is a chap called Alias, and he did a lot of the background stuff for us there, but then it also came to me to implement those backgrounds into a mission and position them right, get the right lighting, so it all looks pretty and all that sort of stuff. And then we've got several members of the X-Wing Alliance upgrade project who's also been helping us, because obviously our mod works with them.
What about the ship models? The Total Conversion features many ship models that were not in the original TIE Fighter Classic, like the Architans, Light Cruiser, the Acclamator class, or fighters like the V-Wing. How did they find their way in the Total Conversion?
Again, this is sort of X-Wing Alliance upgrade, and the community who have built their own models over time. We've added about 25 new models from that. One of the big things with there's one guy in the community, he's called Jeremy, and he is the programmer. He's the one who looks at the exe file, reads the assembly code, because there is no source code for X-Wing Alliance. So he looks at the assembly code of the exe file, translates it into C, so we understand what the function of certain things do, and then he'll write a DLL hook, which basically hooks back into the exe file and injects this code into the executable to change the functionality of something that is otherwise hard-coded into the game. So, for example, the Secret Order tattoo that you can see in your medal casing, you wouldn't be able to do that without that kind of functionality. Same with point defense on starships. We couldn't turn that off before without some code changing to the executable. And we kept badgering him, I'm sure much to his delight. Can we do this? So we'd really like it if we can change it to do this. And so we really pushed the engine much, much further than the X-Wing Alliance upgrade guys did. But it was important we tried to get as much of the original TIE Fighter functionality and mechanics as we could, as closely as possible. If not for him, the balance would be significantly different. I'm not sure it'd be the same mod without that. So,
one minor thing, or maybe not so minor thing, I noticed regarding the sound. In the classic TIE Fighter, the Imperial Navy pilots were men only. In the mod, and especially in the reimagined campaign, I hear many female pilots. Is that intentional?
Well, we put out a call, one of my other guys put out a call from people he knows in the sort of the cosplay community and whatnot for voices, because we needed wingman voices, and there are 12 sets of wingman voices in the game. And so we need to fill out that roster, basically. And yes, we have 3 female actresses who kindly provided their voice work, and I think they did a terrific job. Not all the voices are British. Some people might take issue with that, because obviously the Empire is always portrayed as this evil British Empire. But no, we've got a bunch of Americans, a bunch of English. I've actually provided 2 of the wingman voices, so you might hear a familiar voice a couple of times in there.
I've got a starship firing at me.
Another bandit down. Woo! Great shot! Hey, one, better shake that bandit off the stick.
Another bandit down.
Woo!
Got him.
Another bandit down. Level 10. I'm having trouble over here.
We've got one Finnish guy as well who provided sets. This is a guy I met doing another acting gig here, and I asked him would he like to provide his voice, and he was like, yeah, totally. So yeah, we've got a Finnish guy in there just for a slightly different accent than the normal American British accents. I did try to do as lot as possible, because I really do enjoy doing voice acting. Done it occasionally as a paid gig, but it's something I'd really like to do on a more professional level. But I just realised I can't do it all myself, because people are going to realise it's the same guy doing stuff. No matter how I vary the voice, eventually there's going to be stuff that sounds too similar to other voices.
I couldn't tell that you did Darth Vader as well, so you masked yourself quite well there.
Alpha Group, form up with me and initiate jump to hyperspace.
Yeah, well, the magic of Audacity and changing the pitch and speed of your voice helps that. I'm surprised, actually, people think it's actually a decent Darth Vader impression. I'm just thinking, oh god, this is going to be terrible, but, whatever. I need a Darth Vader voice. I need to put some lines in. This is what I did. So, because you only ever hear it in flight, it's got that in-flight filter on top of it and the breathing sound. I think that kind of masks, perhaps, any imperfections in the voice work there.
Maybe I tried to impersonate him as well a few times, as well as the Emperor for this podcast. It's a challenge, and you never are able to meet the original, of course, but you can get as close as possible.
Yeah, for Vader, it's not so much trying to emulate the sound of his voice as much the way he says the words. That he sort of the Emperor. He elongates certain words and stuff like that.
We must talk copyright. TIE Fighter and the whole Star Wars franchise is owned by Disney, of course. And let me quote Han Solo speaking to Lando Calrissian. "Aren't you afraid the Empire is going to find out about this little operation of yours and shut you down?"
It's always a risk, especially when you're dealing with copyrighted material. It's been my hope, really, that because there are already a lot of Star Wars mods for different games out there, not necessarily for Star Wars games. So, for example, for the 4X game Stellaris, there's a really big Star Wars mod called Fallen Republic for that. It's been fine. There's one for Homeworld, Sins of a Solar Empire, and then you've got the big Empire at War mods. You know, Disney, Lucasfilm, EA seem to be okay with that sort of thing. There has been a couple of exceptions, of course. There was the KOTOR remake called Alperion or something like that, which was shut down. And then there was a Rogue Squadron remake, which was also shut down. Both games were being remade in the Unreal Engine, I believe. And Disney came along and said, nope, please stop doing that. As far as the KOTOR one, I know they're actually doing a KOTOR remake now, but I have to wonder also if they took money from donations and it's a competition thing for them. You know, it could take customers away from the Old Republic. And also if they are doing their own remake, it could be they don't want you to do that. I'm not so sure why they shut the Rogue Squadron one down. It could be because of Squadrons. They're quite different games, so I don't see why, but it could also be the fact that they're just doing it in a different engine. But as far as we go, we are modding a Star Wars game into an existing Star Wars game that's of the same lineage, the same engine lineage. So I'm hoping that is enough to leave us alone. Also the fact that I've been very public in refusing any kind of financial, yes. I've lost count now the number of times people have offered, do you have a Patreon page, can I contribute something? And I'm thinking, oh my god, I really wish I would get paid for this sort of thing, because this is quite good, but I can't take that risk that someone would come and shut us down, because legally speaking we cannot make money out of this, and I don't want to have that risk upon us. So I always refuse, and we say in our FAQ, no, we do not take money, just spread the word. And many people may have noticed that we popped up in pretty much every game stream media upon our release. We were in IGN, Kotaku, Rock Paper Shotgun, PC Gamer, a bunch of other sites as well. And so I'm pretty sure they'd be aware of us by now. And if they wanted to shut us down, they would have already. But yeah, it's one of those things that just kind of hangs over your head as a possible risk, but we're just kind of treating it as, well, until they shut us down, we're just going to keep going. And the mod is out there now, so it's harder to put that genie back in the bottle.
And how satisfied are you with the TIE Fighter total conversion as it is now? We are talking in July 2021.
Pretty satisfied. There are bugs and balance issues, of course. We could have spent another 6 months in beta testing and still found another 1,000 bugs and still released and still have issues. It's really a case of how long do you spend testing, because no matter what you do, every game is going to have bugs. My biggest fear would be that upon release there would be something terribly game breaking. You can install it, or the game would just constantly crash for people or stuff like that, because our beta test team at most was 12 people plus the other members of the mod. That's a very small sample size. But I didn't know how big the mod would be in terms of popularity either. It could be just, a few people would be interested, it'd be a niche thing, a few hundred people would get it, it's fine. But then we got all this attention. As it stands, the ModDB page says we've got at least 12,000 downloads of the mod now. It doesn't sound like a huge amount, but 12,000 people trying to play our mod. And based on all the feedback I've gotten so far, it's been pretty much overwhelmingly positive. Aside from bugs and balance issues, like there's one mission where you can't complete the mission at all because your friendly gunboats end up destroying a shuttle, which is not fun. Apart from little issues like that and occasional issues with the installer, because it's not exactly an easy streamlined process to install the mod, because you have to basically do 4 things, and at any point in that process something can go wrong. But it's still being a pretty low proportion, and based on the feedback I'm getting, yeah, people are generally quite enjoying what we've done here. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done in making it a better experience for people. And I just keep encouraging people to send me feedback and bug reports, and we want to try and address all of that to make it a better experience.
I will put all relevant links in the description, the website on which you will find the files and the instructions of TIE Fighter Total Conversion, the links to your YouTube channel, Angel, where people can find great videos, for example, on how to install the mod, the full soundtrack and behind-the-scenes videos that you mentioned. Jason, is there anything you would like to add? Anything we didn't touch?
Not really. I just really want to say thank you to everyone who's downloaded and played the mod so far. I mean, I really hope most of you are enjoying it, despite any balance or bugs issues. Please do keep giving us feedback and bug reports. We can't make it a better game without the feedback, even if it's negative criticism, as long as it's constructive, of course. I don't care if it's negative, as long as you tell us why you think it's bad and what you think could be better, and we do take it on board, because, you know, without that honest criticism, we can't make it a better experience for you. And then obviously finally just a big thank you to the rest of the TFTC and X-Wing Alliance upgrade teams. I mean, because without which none of this would be possible. So yeah.
I must add one thing. For many years I have heard so many people say this TIE Fighter game was great. If someone just would do a remake with upgraded graphics and sound, that would be fantastic. Old people like me could show the younger people, hey, try this great game, without having to add, well, you have to close your eyes when you play it because of the graphics. Now, someone has done this. This someone is you.
Yep.
And the people you gathered around you.
Yep.
Thank you, Jason, for this great project. It's very inspiring. What would you say to people who say, hey, I want to do this. I want to try to do a mod myself. What do you need?
Vision, time, free time, a lot of passion and motivation as well. You know, you have an idea, you have a vision, and then you start doing it, and then you start realizing just how much effort, how big a project it tends to be. This is my third major mod project in my lifetime, and probably the biggest. But I don't just go around going, oh, here's my next project. I just come across a game, I start playing the game, and then suddenly an idea pops in my head and I just start tinkering, and that's where it just starts, really. Just an idea. And then you start tinkering, you see how difficult is it going to be, is it possible, am I having fun doing it? If you've got the vision, the motivation, the willpower and the time, go for it. Yeah, realise that dream. Obviously, if you are going to use copyrighted material, keep that in mind, that, you know, after years of effort you still might be shut down before you release. Try and keep a low profile, I would say, before you release it. We deliberately kept a low profile ourselves. You know, I was releasing videos, sure, but I wasn't posting in Reddit or anything like that to try and gain the attention. Yeah, keep a low profile. Don't advertise your mod too much until it's ready for release. At least that way, once it's out there, it's harder to put it back. But if it's your own content, you don't need to worry about that. Just go for it. Yeah.
Jason, thank you very much for taking the time to talk about TIE Fighter Total Conversion here on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.